still some students arriving to our event, so could you take a seat and All right, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sławomir Smyczek. I am Vice Rector for Education and International Relations, and I have a big honor on behalf of the authorities of our university to welcome at the second edition of international project Economics Without Border at the University of Economics in Katowice. Especially, I would like to welcome very warmly our distinguished guests, the speakers of the first day, so it means today. Welcome Professor Miroux from the Cornell University, New York, USA. I would like to welcome very warmly Professor Peng, the University of Dallas, University of Texas in Dallas, USA. So as you recognize today, this day will be dedicated to the American view on all the issues related to the economy, especially the international relations. Also, I would like to welcome very warmly Professor Musiałkowska from the Poznań University of Economics, of course in Poland. And Professor Małgorzata Dziębała from the University of Economics in Katowice, our university. Welcome. I would like to welcome also the speakers of the second day, so the speakers of tomorrow. Professor Satish Mott, Vesting Business School, India. Oh, he's not today, but definitely he will be tomorrow. Professor Gusheva Bayramova, Baku Bas University, Azerbaijan. Professor Justyna Majewska from Poznań, University of Economics and Business, Poland. Professor Szymon Truskolaski, Poznań University of Economics and Business in Poland. And our professor, Professor Małgorzata Pańskowska, representing University of Economics in Katowice. She will be the chair of the panel. And also, I would like to welcome very warmly special guest speakers who also delivered the speeches during the third day. A part of the foreign professors, also Professor Hubert Zydorek, University of Texas, Dallas in USA. And Dr. Richard Brendan, Las Vegas Hotels Chain Manager, USA. I would like to welcome also very warmly our professors, our teachers, our students, PhD candidates, all administration staff of our university, as well all the guests from the other Polish universities and also from the business. Ladies and gentlemen, the aim of the project is to promote the science on international scale by organizing at the University of Economics in Katowice debates and presentation of the scientific achievements, research and work of outstanding scientists from around the world. The project main activities includes 3 editions, and today we have the second edition of the Economics Without Borders, and each event including scientific debates, which will take this morning, but also meeting with the PhD candidates, which will be today and tomorrow afternoon. And finally, on Friday, we will have the speeches popularizing science among the young people and the local community, supported by the Global Village, which are promoting the cultures and the most attractive artifacts from the continents that they are dedicated this Economic Without Borders. So even these events are designed to present economics and social culture issue, including aspects of social responsibility and sustainable development from the perspective of the 6 continents. So each 2 continents for each edition. And in October, edition was dedicated to Africa and Europe. This November edition, so this one, is dedicated to North America and Asia. And finally, next year in March, we will dedicate it to Australia and South America. We invite the speakers, which are prominent scientists and experts from the countries such as Egypt, Spain, Germany, Portugal, US, India, Azerbaijan, Australia, Chile, and of course from Poland. They have been recognized for their exceptional achievements in the field of the economic science. In particular, they work in implementing innovative scientific teaching and business solutions. The Economic Without Borders will be one-of-kind large-scale initiative during the University of Economics in Katowice. I believe will become Poland's economical hub. It will be placed to be where the high-class researchers from around the world will share their knowledge, discuss and exchange the ideas and experience. We also believe that this project will help us to identify new opportunities and hidden potentials and create the new solutions for the economy, especially now during the economical crisis which is taking on every single 6 continents. So officially, I can say the Economic Without Borders, the 2nd edition is open. Of course, I would like to, and I need to, underline that the project has received fundings from the Ministry of Education and the Science of the Republic of Poland under the program of Social Responsibility of Science. Ladies and gentlemen, the project was recognized by the local authorities and who gives us the patronage. All the patronage are presented here. Of course, the main patronage was taken by the Minister of the Education and Science. Also, the local authorities take this patronage, including the Metropolis, the Voivodeship, and also the Marshal Office and the President of the city of the Katowice. Also, the patronage was given by the NAWA, so it's a National Association for the International Exchange, as well by the CIMAN, because 2 years ago our university received accreditation, international accreditation of the whole institution by this organization. Also, the honorary patronage was given by the CRASP, so this is the Association of the Polish Rectors of the Polish Public Universities. Also, CRUE, which is the Conference of the Rectors of the University of Economics taking place in Poland. Also, the Association of the Polish Association of the Economists, the journal Perspectives, Prompt, as well as the rector of our university, Professor Celina Olszek. Of course, any event nowadays cannot be taking place without media, so also we get the media patronage, which is the local Polish television number 3, Dziennik Zachodni, and also Forum, as well as the other electronic media patronage. So today we will dedicate this day to the American view, so North American view on the different perspective on the economy and the social and cultural development in this region, on this continent. So that's why we invite the guests from USA, but also it will be to make our discussion, our debates more interesting, and we will also be looking at these problems and the challenges from the Polish perspective. So I hope that this debate will be very, very interesting for you. So I would like to invite you to see some short movie about the North America and all the data showing the characteristics of this continent.
Hi, my name is Hela. I'm from the University of Economics in Katowice, and I think that economics has no borders. There are 7 continents in the world. In this series, I'm going to fill you in on details about their economic and social cultural issues. Let me guide you across North America today. North America is located in the Northern Hemisphere and almost entirely within the Western Hemisphere. It's the 3rd biggest continent that covers 16.5% of total Earth land area. It consists of 23 sovereign states and 15 dependent territories. Around 7.5% of world's population lives here. The tallest mountain in North America is Mount McKinley, located in Alaska, with a height of 6,190 meters. The longest river is the Mississippi River. It rises in Lake Itasca in Minnesota and ends in the Gulf of Mexico and covers a total distance of 3,766 kilometers. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. North America's gross domestic product is almost 29.5 trillion US dollars, thus it has the second highest continental economy in nominal terms. Americans deal with 4.5% inflation, and unemployment rate amounts to 10%. Statistically, a North American resident pays $1.08 per liter of fuel, while monthly they earn $3,960. Every North American citizen has access to electricity. CO2 emissions amount to 1475 metric tons per capita. Did you know that there is no landlocked country in North America? Canada covers almost half of North America's continent, and it's even slightly larger than China. The most dominant languages are English, Spanish, French, but there are records of over 400 other languages spoken there. In this continent, you have to see Grand Canyon in the United States of America and Niagara Falls, which splits the border between Canada and the USA. Well-known man-made landmarks are Statue of Liberty, Golden Gate Bridge, and Empire State Building, which are located in the USA, and Chichen Itza, located in Mexico. That's all for now. If you want to know more about our world, check out our YouTube channel. And if you want to learn more about economics, study at the University of Economics in Katowice, Poland.
All right, as you can see, the data, especially concerning the economical data, was taken at the end of 2021. And we can see what's going on right now when this so turbulent environment is right now, not only in Europe, but generally the whole world. So that's why this discussion about the economical issues is so important, because this is never-ending story. All right, so the time is to invite our fantastic speakers and to start debates. So I would like to invite to the front desk Professor Miroux, who is a faculty fellow at the Emerging Markets Institute, S.C. Johnson School of Management at the Cornell University in USA. She is the former director of the divisions of technology and logistics in the United Nations Conference on the Trade and Development, and the head of the Secretary of the United Nations Commissions on the Science and Technology for the Development. She has over 30 years of experience in international trade and finance and technology and innovation policy. For the several years, she directed the World Investment Report, the United Nations flagship report of FDI, and transnational cooperation that received Academy of International Business President Award in 2020. I would like to also welcome very warmly Professor Mike Peng. Professor Mike Peng, he is Jindal Chair of Global Strategy at the University of Texas in Dallas, National Science Foundation Careers Award winner, and the Fellow at the Academy of International Business and the Asia Academy of Management. His research has investigated in strategic in Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, North and South America. He's one of the most prolific and most influential scholars on the global strategy. Used in more than 40 countries, the textbook are world market leader about the global strategy that have been translated into the Chinese, Portuguese and Spanish. He's also served as the editor board of many prestigious international journals. And as a contrast, I would like to invite two Polish professors. So Professor Ida Musiałkowska, she is associate professor and head of the Department of the European Studies at the Poznań University of Economics and Business in Poland. And also she served as the program director for international economics at this university. Her research interests are dynamic and of the regional integration and development processes in European Union and the world. European integration, Latin America integration, regional business cycles, and policy transfer. And I would like to welcome very warmly the leader of this panel, Professor Małgorzata Dziembała. Professor is Associate Professor and Head of the Department of International Economics Relations at the University of Economics in Katowice. Her research focuses on the European economics integration, European Union regional policy, and the competitiveness of the region. International cooperation of the regions, including cross-border cooperation and innovation policy. Before I will give the floor to our prestigious speakers, I would like to give you some organizational issue. First of all, this first debate, because today we will have two debates, so the first debate will finish at 11:30. So please stay till the end of this debate, because you will have enough time to go to the next, to the following lectures. So stay in the aula till the end of it. Around 15 minutes before we will finish the debate, you will see on the screen the special QR code. And you can scan this QR code and then automatically by your mobile phone, and then automatically you will be placed on the list if you need, for example, the confirmation that you are here and you are missing the classroom, so for the teacher. So just around 15 or 10 minutes before the end of the debate, on the screen you will see the QR code that you can scan it, and everything will be automatically. So we need to save the word, and you should implement sustainable solution even for such activities. All right, so thank you very much. I leave you in very good hands and very good host of Professor Małgorzata Dziembała, and I wish you very successful debate and this discussion. Thank you very much.
Dear guests, dear students, it's my pleasure to host you today also, and it's a great pleasure to have you in today's session devoted to session number 1, devoted to innovative research in economics from the perspective of North America. And so in fact we have just to make some technical issues, we have two round of questions which is addressed to all the speakers. And then at the end of the session, we'll try to answer some questions that arise during our discussion. So let me start with the first question, just the general one, which we would like, which is addressed to all the speakers, to all our guests. And could you please describe the scope of your research? I mean topics, contribution to theory, major findings. What do you consider very important in your research? So maybe Professor Mike Peng will start with the first question.
Do you want us to sit here and go?
Yes, I think that we can sit.
Okay.
It's up to you.
Can I have the remote? Is it remote? Good morning. Jin Kuyang Chi. For the second time. I want to thank your university and the hosts for having me the second day, and then you'll be seeing me for a few more days. So some of you might have come here. So I want to switch topic a little bit because today we have homework to do. Professor Dziembała gave us the homework questions, asking us to describe our work. And then from that point on, we'll talk a bit about the innovative aspects of research. So by way of introduction, I want to say that I received all my education in North America, but for the first time, I'm speaking on behalf of the North American perspective. I don't think I ever thought of it this way. But in terms of primary discipline, my academic training is in strategic management, and my academic interest is in global business. In addition to serving as a faculty member at UT Dallas, I have previously served as a faculty member at Ohio State University, Chinese University of Hong Kong, and University of Hawaii, and have been a visiting professor at some of these countries and have lectured in many places. So this, I want to emphasize, is my first visit to a business school or a university in the wonderful region of Central and Eastern Europe. I mean it when I say the wonderful region because I've done some research on Central and Eastern Europe, but I have never had the pleasure of engaging in academic presentations and debates until yesterday. So that is really a personal pleasure and an honor. So thank you for coming here. In terms of the impact, there was an additional question, what is the impact? So lots of papers, a reasonable number of Google citations, and so on and so forth. So maybe I'll skip this. So one aspect I would argue that we tend to do in North America research is we tend to be global. Actually, I have never seen any colleague who will say, I do North America research. But I've seen colleagues who will tell me I do Africa research or Asia research. I think we'd like to focus on fundamental questions in the field. Everybody has a field. If you double major, you have two fields. So if you're majoring marketing, so you know the fundamental questions in marketing. You do economics, you know some fundamental questions in economics. So for what I do, I focus on fundamental questions in strategy and international business. I actually published a paper in this aspect. So in the field of strategic management, if you want to ask me, is this a North American perspective or a global perspective, I would argue this actually is a global perspective, but we can use North American data or European data or Africa data. So from Roumel, Chandel, and Thies, three leading scholars in the field of strategic management, they published a definitive book in 1994. In my view, very influential, guiding my work, and I think guiding the work of a lot of us working in the field. So we try to understand these four fundamental questions. Fundamental questions serve a purpose. Once you see a question, you know this is not a marketing question. This is not an information systems question. This is a strategic management question. And I did consult with Professor Jimbala beforehand. Economics before borders, it's a wonderful term, but as I showed you, I'm not an economist by training. I don't really do narrowly defined economics research. But what I do is, broadly speaking, business administration or strategic management or global business research. So with that understanding, I can share with you these four questions. Number one, why do firms differ? Number two, how do firms behave? Number three, what determines the scope of the firm? And number four, what determines the success and failure of firms around the globe? So it is the interest in trying to dive deep into some of these fundamental questions that has been guiding my research and the research of a lot of colleagues in the field. Yesterday, I presented this book, my newest global strategy, to Professor Smirchik. So I can tell you one thing, every edition of this book, in every chapter, I try to answer, address, and focus on some of these fundamental questions. So the advice I would suggest is really think big. And we all start small. Every one of us would start small. But when you start something small, a small research problem, a small context, a small study, a small company, but don't forget why you are doing this. So hopefully you will create that link that your small project, your small company that you are studying is somehow connected to help us understand and answer some of the big questions in the field. And I understand not every one of us is in strategic management, but I just want to use this as an example. Maybe I'll stop here. How about this? Because otherwise I'll run a quiz, but I'll do that later. Is that all right?
And yeah, and what about the scope of research? This Professor Miroux, could you answer this question? And I mean, major findings, contribution to theory, some reflections.
I also have a small presentation which I'd like to have on the screen. And first, just to let you know, I'm very happy to be in Katowice at the University of Economics and addressing students. I think it's always very stimulating because you are the world of tomorrow. So we hope that the message we are giving is really going to reach you. First thing. Second thing, I will present some of the works that I've been doing with my colleague, Lourdes Casanova, at the Emerging Market Institute at the Johnson College of Business at Cornell University. It will just be a glimpse of what we are doing because I will zoom over a report, but Lourdes and I, separately or together, we also publish on a number of papers. I also must say that as a background, I'm mixing a business background because I did a business school in France, so a European one, so I'll be very happy to share with you, though my experience dates back quite some time. So I graduated from HEC in France, and then I also did at the same time, and it's also an advice to mix topics, to mix areas. I did a PhD in economics at Sorbonne University, which I finished in the early 80s, I'm sorry to say. And last point, I also did a master in politics. So when you mix all that, I think you better understand the economics and the relationship with politics, because economics is politics and vice versa. And we see it so much nowadays. That's something I'd love to continue, but I'll stop there. Anyway, so EMI is an institute where basically what we try to do is to expose the students, hopefully they will be the business leaders of tomorrow, to issues to which they are not that familiar. So since we are in North America, emerging markets is not necessarily something that students are very familiar with. And it's important to understand not only the business aspects, but all the environment around, including the macroeconomics. So we have a team. Lourdes Casanova is the head of the institute and the faculty fellow. And we work a lot with the students. It's very important to engage with them, to have side activities in addition to the normal work. I know that means workload, but at the end, I think it's quite rewarding. We have 3 pillars: education, outreach, research, and knowledge. I'll go back to that later on for the second session of the question. Now the research. Just as I said a moment ago, if you want, the annual report that we publish on emerging market multinational contains a lot of the research that we are doing. At the Institute, we have decided, because we are in the business school, to zoom on the business enterprises of emerging economies. We have published up to now 7th report. The last one was dealing with some of the issues related with global value chain. The first one was dealing specifically with the rise of China, and as years went back, we were fascinated in a way about realizing the overwhelming presence of China in business from emerging economy and then obviously globally. We collaborate with a number of international organizations, the World Bank, the OECD, the United Nations, the Inter-American Development Bank, and so on, and a number of universities. Again, I hope I'll be able to get back to it later on. First thing I wanted to mention, we are zooming on emerging markets and an issue because my field is international business and international economics and emerging markets, the first issue we wanted to specify is what is an emerging market. And it's a very interesting question because there are various ways to define it. And the main problem or challenge is that there is no commonly agreed definition of what is an emerging market. And there are areas in economics where you will have to define precisely the subject, the animals that you are studying. Otherwise, you will go overboard and you will not be able to limit specifically what you want to study or analyze. So, bottom line, there was no definition. There were lists from investors, from international organizations, and so on. And the criteria were very different. Some people were even including the democracy or political system criteria. So we decided, because we wanted to examine the changes which was taking place in the global economy, we said, okay, we are going to establish a list of the 20 top emerging economies, those that basically everybody will agree are emerging economy and that are representative of the phenomenon which is taking place. A phenomenon that we could summarize by a shift of global economic and geopolitical power in the world. So we constructed or we established a list of the 20 largest emerging economies and took into consideration a number of criteria. For instance, we eliminated those who are considered as advanced economy. And for this, there is a special list published by the IMF. You have on the right the list of the E20 or the 20 largest economy that we consider emerging. By the way, this list is very close to a list which was published by IMF staff. I do not say the IMF because there is no official list, but IMF staff. It's very close, and our criteria also really are relatively similar. But what we did last year is that we decided to put China in a unique position. China is so particular that when you look at emerging economy, you have to do with and without China. Otherwise, your conclusion will be blurred and may just only reflect the Chinese phenomenon. Okay, our research. We are a business school, so it's really practical-oriented. It's practice-oriented. And I want to draw your attention to the importance of applied research. And there was a very interesting article published in early 2022 by Lilac Nashum, Karsovan, and Ari Van Asche, which was Agenda for Practice-Oriented Research. It will be increasingly important to say, in terms of policy implication, what does that mean? And we can take again about it later on. And last point, my colleague and myself, we have a wealth of data available. I have the privilege of experience, not to say age, that, 20 or 30 years ago, when we were doing a study, it was hard to get the data. Really. You would call the IMF or the World Bank. At best, you would send an email when not so long ago, and you might get a file somewhere. Nowadays, at the click of a button, you have access to a wealth of information, including on poorest country. Various type of information from the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, you name it. And you have also databases from corporation, that's expensive as recognized, but it does exist. So this is available to the students, and it enables us to work better. But, and I come back to a question mentioned by Mike, it is important to have the question first, and then you look at the data. Not necessarily you say, oh, that's the data I have. What I'm going, to mine them and play with them, and perhaps I'll have something interesting. That's an advice I would give to all the students which have in mind to do research. What is your question? How useful will it be? And where is the data? That's the sequence I would suggest. The topics. Emerging markets in a new phase of globalization. The China factor is a topic with my colleague we have focused on. We published a book in 2020, which was called The Era of Chinese Multinational Competing for Global Dominance. That was, just at the time, there was a rivalry between, the rivalry always existed, by the way, but it just became more visible between China and the United States. We also publish every year a list of the top 500 largest business from emerging markets. There is a global Fortune 500, so we are trying to copy in a way, very modestly. It's a way, we are signaling a way. We don't pretend we are the best, but these are avenues for further research. And the key issues we have been focusing recently, sustainable development, especially ESG, the pros and cons. There is a lot of pros, but there is a lot of cons also. Innovation from emerging markets, it's part of the shift I was mentioning. Emerging markets are no longer the copycats they were considered in the past. In a number of areas, they are becoming leaders, and this has to be recognized, in particular for Western traditional multinationals, because they mean that they are becoming huge competitors, and on top of it, they have a huge consumer markets, which they know very well. So that's the first one. And the last one is digitalization, because digitalization or digitization is at the heart of the transformation that is taking place. It's opening a number of avenues in markets or in economies which were a little, the laggard and left aside. Again, an issue which is, the cost of infrastructure. What does it mean in terms of digitalization? And finally, a snapshot on the report that we published. The final version will be available in February 2023. The shifting business landscape that we, illustrate every year, just a very simple graph. You now have in the Fortune Global 500 more Chinese firms than American firms. That tells quite a lot in terms of economic weight. And you can see that the change really has taken 10 years to be so visible and manifest. We also highlight the fact that the growth of the Chinese multinational in the global and the biggest business is a little bit at the expense of other emerging markets, but more at the expense of developed economies, especially in Europe. You have much less UK company in the Fortune Global 500 nowadays than 10 years ago, and so the Europeans have lost a lot, and the Japanese. Again, it also explains to some extent the relation or the apprehension of advanced economies vis-à-vis, in particular, the Chinese multinationals. But that being said, let's not forget that there are other major economies in the making. I'm thinking about India, Brazil, and so on. And perhaps, do I have a little bit of time, or I am a little over?
A little bit over, so I think that we'll just...
so perhaps we'll stop there, and then I can get back to it later.
Yes, later.
Okay,
so,
very good.
So thank you very much for this global perspective, and I mean the emerging market perspective, and then we move to the Polish perspective and to the regional perspective. And so let me present Professor Musiałkowska from the Poznań University. And the same question about the topics, scope of the research, very fascinating one, the regional perspective, but the international perspective at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and for having me here in Katowice, and thank you, Małgosia, for this kind words. So, firstly, I'd like to present our university. We are in Katowice, but also in Poznań we have one of the oldest business schools that was founded in 1926. And our main mission, according to our strategy, is also to provide social responsibility, conduct innovative research, and educate leaders of the future. So this is the main message from the strategy. And also, I'd like to show the clusters of our research that were proposed quite recently at the university. So this is focused around sustainable and resilient economy as the first, technological and business innovations, and also sustainable consumption and production, and inclusive society. So we looked at the research that is prepared by our scholars, and we tried to gather it together around those four, and also we are just trying to research the most important issues in the current societies and economies. So going back to the question that was posed, I'd like to focus on three issues, on three projects that is conducted either by our department and also by our colleagues from the university and also from the Institute of International Business and Economics. Also, my background is a bit wider because I graduated from the international economic and political relations, so it's quite similar to what Anna was just presenting, and we also have this broader understanding of the context, which is very much important for the contemporary research. And also I got my PhD in international economics and regional studies and habilitation in more comparative studies on transfer of a European regional policy that it's delivered at subnational level. So we are going back from the national context to the regional and local, to other countries and other organizations. So my focus was on, is it possible first to transfer, to learn from the experiences of Europe and other countries and other organizations, also in American and Southern American. I covered Latin America, which also includes Mexico, which somehow fits to the topic of today's conference. So it was the first issue to be asked, is it possible, is it happening, and how is it happening? And also another important issue is what are the factors, what are facilitators and inhibitors of such an exchange that might happen in international arena. So I think it's quite broad, because you can apply it to any kind of policy or business event that happens, and then you have to apply it to a certain field and adjust it accordingly to your perspective, to your research perspective. So I would say that maybe going to the next question, what's innovative is first is the scope of the research, because I analyzed in my research something that is the policy that it's directed internally, because if you deliver regional policy, you think about the country and disparities between different units of territory. And my question was, is it possible that somebody else will use something that is called in Europe regional or cohesion policy as well? So it was the first, and it resulted that via different channels it was possible. So it was my first finding, and also, of course, it's more visible in terms of ideas and concepts, and it's quite difficult when it comes to the implementation of the policy, because then you need a political will and support just to implement certain solutions in different settings. So it was just like the main findings and main contribution also to the literature. What was the question of Professor Dziambała? And I think it was one of the most fascinating projects I also shared with the colleagues from the whole European Union and from other universities, because we organized a conference on such a topic, and it was well received also among other scholars. And as the outcome, and just coming back to the more like promotion of something, we presented a special issue on international learning and transfer of the policy with regards to regional development, spatial planning, and transportation as well, and it's published in 2018 in Regional Studies. So if you are interested in that, you can read a lot of contributions of other colleagues with regards to the issues. So it was one of the like transferring of European experiences abroad, also to Americas, to build Americas. So this is the first research project I wanted to highlight. The second is, I would say, more international. Of course, the context will matter for the answers that we got, but it was about cryptocurrencies and the future of local currencies as such, and we started to verify if cryptocurrencies can be a future. Are they used in the crisis by the countries, by people, and by the companies as well? And it was a set of also findings mainly in two papers that bring comparative perspective to our research. One is around whether the Bitcoin is safe haven, hedge, or diversifier in different countries that will use to some extent the cryptocurrencies. And then we were looking especially at the countries that is under the crisis situation, which was Venezuela, and it is well quite interesting. If you read the comparison between other assets like gold, like oil, and also other assets that are available. So it was another one. And the third one, we were just at the end of the project. It was around urban regeneration and the use of sustainable financing with the use of public instruments, public financial instruments, mainly this instrument is called Jessica initiative, that it uses EU funding for urban regeneration. So it was like the quite recent project, and we published a book this year about financial engineering and sustainable funding of urban development in the European Union, with a special case of Poland. So this is another scope of research. And of course we have more. I just picked up 3 of them just to start the discussion. And I think that for this part I will stop in here, and if we have more time we will discuss the issue. Thank you.
So, dear professors, thank you very much for the excellent introduction to the main topic of our session. So now we start with this, concerning innovation. So now we start with the second round of questions concerning innovation, as I mentioned. So we have the global, national, emerging market perspective and the regional one. So different perspectives are included into the session. So, the second question is, if you could briefly describe and could give us the view on what is the innovative in your research. What is the best practice, if it's possible, in disseminating research results to academics in North America and Europe? What are differences between the North American and European perspective, and in research in terms of theoretical foundation and research methodology? Shall we start with Professor Peng? I think with this global perspective, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Let me continue. This is a real quiz in my opening day, okay? So all of you are my students. Opening day quiz. The question is right in front of you. Professor Miroux just gave you some preview about Fortune Global 500, okay? So in alphabetical order, which city has the largest number of headquarters of Fortune Global 500 companies? Alphabetically, Beijing, London, New York, Paris, Tokyo. So here's your North American perspective, European perspective, Asian perspective. Economics without borders, okay? Okay, here are my rules. Everybody, students, don't shout. Raise your hand. Everybody, 2 rules. Rules of the game. Number 1, everybody must participate. Everybody must raise your hand. Second, everybody can only raise your hand once. One hand once only, okay? So we have about 200 people, right? So, okay, alphabetically, Beijing. Maybe, shall we say 20, 30 hands? Okay, all right. London. London, 2 hands, all right. New York. Everybody must be voting once, okay? So, New York. How many hands do we have? 20, 30, 40 maybe? Okay. Okay, then Paris. Paris is 0. Then the rest of you must be voting for Tokyo. Not everyone voted. Someone cheated. In Australia, if you don't vote, you will be arrested. Okay? But we cannot arrest you, so the results. Who knew the results? Who knew the correct answer? When you voted for different cities, right? Who knew the correct answer? No one knew. You were guessing. Okay, fine. Guessing. Majority of you voted for, slightly more of you voted for New York, right? People voted for New York. The majority of my students voted for New York. The answer is wrong. Okay? New York is number 3. So let's do a second round voting. Second round. Eliminate New York, okay? Second round. Okay, so Paris and London didn't get enough votes, so we can eliminate those. No, competition boils down to Beijing versus Tokyo. Okay, second round, Beijing versus Tokyo. Okay, everybody please vote. Alphabetically, Beijing. More hands up. Okay, Tokyo. Smaller number. Second round, yes, you won. Beijing, write it down if you didn't know. Beijing now has the largest number of Fortune Global 500 company headquarters. and Miroux, and I had almost the same slides, right? I have 1 extra year. So now we have to study these companies, top 10 companies, top 10 countries. So how I would do my research, take a look at the data. Theory-driven, but also data-driven. What do the data tell us? There are lots of ways to read the data, but I just want you to focus on the top 10 companies, right? And there are many ways to read the data, but here's one way I read the data. Of the top 10 companies, 6 of them are state-owned. 6 of them are state-owned. And a couple of decades ago, we saw state-owned companies were becoming obsolete. They would be privatized. We don't need to spend too much time studying them. I guess we are wrong as a field. So how do firms differ? How do state-owned firms and privately owned firms differ? We don't know enough about the answer. That's why we do research. There is this rise of state capitalism. And why are SOEs such an enduring and adaptive organizational form? Many people predicted their demise, their death. They're going down the historical dustbin. And they refuse to die, despite the best efforts to privatize them, to kill them. That's worthy of research. Why do firms differ? Fundamental question 1. So I started doing some of my research on SOEs in 1996. I published one of the first papers in the Academy of Management Review, a management theory journal. And you know what? After a quarter century, I continue to work on this question. This newest paper is called Pyramid Ownership and SOE Innovation. Most people thought SOEs are not going to be very innovative. Actually, I'll come back to that SOE list. The largest Chinese company is number 3, State Grid. I went to ask my own students, name the largest Chinese company. All of them said Alibaba. Some of them said Tencent. And then someone said Huawei. All wrong. State Grid. State Grid is this large, obscure, but powerful multinational company that no one paid much attention except when I met Anne Marie and her colleague Lourdes. They kindly wrote a very interesting case study opening up what's going on inside that company. So I think this is part of this research. How does State Grid behave in a different way than all of these other companies? You know all of these other companies, okay? So take a look again. You have 4 Chinese SOEs. Saudi Aramco is state-owned. The last state-owned company is someone everybody knows, but nobody knows it is state-owned. It is Volkswagen. Volkswagen is owned by 2 German state governments. Are they state-owned? Yes, Volkswagen is state-owned. So how do they behave differently? That is a fundamental question. All right? Give you some other examples. Going down. How do firms behave? This is some data from a paper, not by me, by some colleagues. I quoted their source, Bloom et al. So they look at different countries. 1 to 5, referring to management quality. 5 is the highest quality, 1 is the lowest quality. All right? So they look at the US distribution, and they look at the distribution across different parts of the world. So essentially what they found is you look at China, you look at India, you look at Greece and Portugal, they have a large tail to your left side, meaning they have a highest number of companies not on the right side. You have more companies on the right side, better performing companies. So how do we theorize about such findings? That's question 2. How do firms behave? Basically, how can firms from one country improve capabilities, performance? So how do we move more companies to the right, basically? From a policy standpoint, you guys focused on policy standpoint, right? As a policymaker, you look at these distribution of capabilities, right? So how can we move more companies to the right side? Developing the resource-based view, special resources and capabilities, that's another way to answer the question. And another way to look at this is previous generations of scholars, Michael Porter to your left, Jay Barney to the right, they took a look at the industry, 5 forces. They took a look at the special resources and capabilities, right? The resource-based view. So they have their answers. And what my colleagues and I have been trying to do is to add an institution-based answer. So we developed the strategy tripod. We say, you need to look at the industry for sure. You need to look at firm-specific resources and capabilities for sure. But don't forget, institutional transitions and conditions. They drive strategy. Ultimately, they drive performance. We have done some research on institution-based views, starting with the official pronunciation or announcement in 2002-2003. And this is a paper for which I'm very proud. Award-winning research, probing theoretically into Central and Eastern Europe. My colleague Klaus Meyer and I did this paper in 2005, and after 10 years, colleagues in the Journal of International Business Studies, JIBS, JIBS, nominated this paper to be the JIBS Decade Paper, Best Decade Paper Award. So we basically said, look, transitions are happening, companies are growing or shrinking left and right. How do we make theoretical sense? So we suggest 3 theories. Transaction cost being one. Each privatization deal, for example, is a transaction. You go to your supermarket, you buy a bottle of milk, that is a transaction. So transactions not only refer to consumers buying and selling, it also refers to buying and selling companies. That is a transaction. There are costs. And some companies do better than others. What's unique about these companies? Resources and capabilities. And under the conditions of great transitions, institutions are changing. Why some companies are rising to the top? Other companies are sinking. Some companies learn how to swim. Other companies, you teach them all the tools. They never learn. Why is this? Well, institutions have something to do with it. And more recently, we continue to promote the institution-based view as the third leg for a strategy tripod. And this is a paper that almost got JIBS 2018 Decade Award. They decided not to give me the award because, remember, 3 years ago, they already gave me the Best Paper Award. So in the name of diversity and inclusion, they decided not to give me the award. Because the award receiving paper for the 2008 paper was a great paper, but its citation numbers are smaller than what this paper is getting. This is the another way to say institution-based view of international business strategy. This time we focus on emerging economies. I could go on, but let me stop here and let other comments.
So thank you very much for your perspective. And now we move to Professor Miroux. And what is innovative in your research? Please briefly describe us this. I do hope it will be the emerging market perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I will quickly go on some of the elements that we are doing, and also I'll try to elaborate a little bit about, at least from my experience, how we teach and how we relate with the students in the institute. But just building on upon what Mike has just said, as I said a moment ago, our work is a database and evidence-based, so we mine data. So we did an exercise which may have, which you might repeat or can be further elaborated. 2 or 3 years ago, we looked at the price of similar product, really similar characteristic in the United States and sold by either Chinese or other emerging market companies and US company. We eventually zoomed on Chinese company because one criteria was the biggest seller in the US market. And the idea was to see, okay, how do the prices compare? It's always a little bit difficult because, if you have a computer, that one has more memory and so on. But we worked with a group of associate researchers and students, and we basically scoped through the internet again, because we had access to the data. And of course, it's related to the time, but if you take a snapshot at that particular time, it was, I think, we began in 2017, we looked at the computer, desktop, laptop, smartphones, refrigerators, washing machine, and so on. And it was quite difficult to know whether an 8-kilo washing machine was better than a 4, and so on. That kind of thing, very practical. But the bottom line is that, yes, we could say that Chinese companies still compete on price. There is no denial about it. But there are sectors where the price differential was much less than expected. That's the first. And there were sectors where even 1 or 2 brands was higher, more expensive than the US brands. And the most glaring example at the time was the telephone, and we did it again last year. We in the UK market for the smartphone, because Huawei cannot be sold in the US, and we could see that, for instance, in the smartphone, you have a Chinese brand like Huawei who targets the lower end, but also the higher end of the market. So bottom line, they can cover the whole range of consumer. And that's a major change because it means that they are becoming formidable competitors. And it goes very much with the efforts which are being made in terms of branding. And to tell you the truth, I think it was 2018 or 19, I was stuck because I was on the, in Paris, next to Notre Dame, and there was a huge building, and there was a huge, how do you say, a drape with the word of Huawei. It was like, I don't know how many square meters covering a facade of a building. You would never have seen that 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Or you arrive in Roissy and you have ICCTV, the Chinese channel, with publicity. Or you are in Switzerland and you watch TV and you get advertisement for higher white goods. So this is really changing the landscape, and it means that for the people who, the enterprises from the traditional Western, they have perhaps to reconsider the way they are going about. And what does it mean in terms of research and also messages? And that's a motto that my colleague often repeats, is that she said in the US, we were used to teach kind of students that it was important for the enterprise to maximize the price the customer was willing to pay. That's still the case, but when you have a competitor who has innovative product, good quality product, and low price, then you are in trouble. So that's the kind of studies that we are doing. And that's really something we want to further, because it's an interesting topic. I'll stop there in terms of the type of research that we are doing, but you were asking, the differences between, in terms of research. My experience is limited to what I know at the Cornell University, so I cannot generalize if I could say. But first, in the relation with the students, and it's open. The door is always open. We involve the students in our work. We have a dialogue, and we try to have dialogue. I think it's also taking place also in Europe, but so I do not say it's the best. I cannot compare because I don't have a point of comparison nowadays. I have a point of comparison 30 or 40 years ago, and it was very different. But it's very important so that the students, they feel they are part of the research exercise also, so that they can broaden their scope, that the openness is a key element. And the other element in terms of research, and I was very interested by your example, is that I have the feeling, but that's again my personal feeling, perhaps my experience is limited, is that perhaps in Europe there is a closer relation between the research and policy making places like the EU, much more than the United States. That's the feeling I have. And that, to some extent, is a little bit of a problem. It takes us to what I said at the beginning, the relationship between the so what of your research. You have given very good example. It seems you are working closely with the EU. When I was in the United Nations, because I had an academic background, I was involving in my research on the World Investment Report and all the commissions and meetings that we had with policymakers. We were bringing in academics to give the solid scientific background that we were needing sometimes when delegates were putting forward political position. We at least had the academic side. But I think that perhaps in Europe I had that feeling that it's a little bit more important than in the US. But at the same time, among the academics, it very often looks better to publish in a A-rated journal than for an international organization. It's viewed differently. So this perception is something which, perhaps something which would be worth reconsidering.
So thank you very much. And the same question to Professor Ida Musiałkowska. What about your research? What kind of innovation do you have in your research?
Thank you for this question. And before it's coming to the screen, I'd like to, thank you. Firstly, when we are talking about innovative approach, I think it's a scope of the research I mentioned before. So this is the policy itself that managed to be internally oriented, but it's possible that you can learn from the experiences and use it elsewhere. So this is the first issue. Then the second two are more related to the use of innovative financial instruments, because both cryptocurrencies and public and financial instruments, they are somehow innovative to people, to companies, and to public administration. So they are just dealing with this new instruments, they're learning how to use them, how to implement them into the daily operations. So I would say that this is innovative to some extent. And of course, there are differences, and I would like to give one example, because I was doing a part of my research at the University of Pittsburgh some years ago, and I was just giving a seminar to colleagues at the university, and we couldn't find a common ground on the definition of what's the cohesion as such. So it was not known to the colleagues at the university what it is. So how it should be related to regional development, because we are in here talking about institutional economics, development studies, and international relations. So firstly, we discussed a lot how to find a common line to understand each other. So it was something that also goes in line with what was just said before by Anne, that we have a different approach, but also sometimes we use different concepts, but they are context dependent. So firstly, this is to everybody, that you have to understand the local conditions, the context, in order to operate there, either you are a company or just like individual or a public administration. So this is the first issue. And it was quite striking, but we found this common understanding, and then we just discussed how different are regional policies in the US, because they are, however, not developed to the same extent as we have in Europe, in the European Union, and in Poland as well. So it was the first one. The second issue is, again, related to the context. I was giving seminars and classes in Mexico, in many universities in Mexico, both public and private. And the first issue was to explain how we shape our economics and business in Europe and in Poland, and then we needed to present at least the issue of transition from, given the example of Poland, how we transited from central socialist economy to the current state of the art, and also how we operate right now in integrated Europe, where we have a lot of economic integration going on, and how different it is when we are just comparing it to one state, one country, which is either Mexico or the US, and then how the countries are going to a common agreement when they wish to go with regional integration within the European Union. So it was another context-dependent element that I found a bit different, and also important to be explained at the very beginning as what we understand by certain notions, by certain concepts, and certain policy-making elements. So I think it was like the most important, and also we have different experiences with students and our colleagues if we are going with our research projects or program studies. So we see completely different reactions of students when we are dealing with some issues with the basic economics like macro, micro, business strategies or any other. And we see firstly the questions that are coming from American students. So they are open, they are questioning, challenging professors. And for the European students, it's not that common. So I think it's a big difference that we see, and I think it is also visible later on in the business relations. So maybe then it's a bit less visible, but still we see different attitudes. So we see these cultural differences that we need to understand if we want to go together for business relations or any other. So I think it is just like maybe very simple observation, but this is what we have when we're just dealing with teaching and with research projects, how many differences we have, and that first we need to talk to understand each other, then we reduce some barriers, some fears, and then we go and cooperate together. So I think that I would stop in here. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And now, after the presentation, we'll have the round of questions. And from the audience, do you have any questions towards distinguished guests, distinguished professors? I can see for the moment. Yes. Are there any questions from the audience? So, yeah, okay. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for a lot of inputs, but one maybe general question connected with the defining globalization processes and dealing with data. So maybe the question to Professor Ann, because now we can see this need for the reinventing global value chains, and also we can observe the reshoring processes. So many things change. So there is the question if we still are dealing with globalization or deglobalization processes, and how to measure the current stage of the globalization. Are the data like that useful, or how to use there? Just to say something more, at which stage we are at now talking about the globalization. Thank you very much.
Okay, so please answer the question. Yes. Are there any questions that we could collect? Okay, so please answer. Yeah. There is another one. Of course, I have also some questions, but this question will be later on. So thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of discussion on the balance of power, you could say, maybe, and the distribution over the last 20, 40 years between different regions. Something of interest to me, right, is contrasting that with maybe the perspective of rising tide lifts all ships. So maybe, even though maybe there's been a shift away from Europe or other areas, right, as a percentage of top 500 global brands or largest companies in the world, how do you think that contrasts with just the fact that, of course, you know, we're aspiring maybe towards a $100 trillion economy. In countries like China, right, hundreds have been lifted out of poverty. You know, worldwide starvation is down. Things like that, maybe that just speak to the how everyone is doing in the countries they're in, even if as a percentage of the total, right, the percentage might have gone down, but in absolute terms, that region has developed over time.
Are there any questions? Oh, okay, I do believe that other questions will come up, so we'll start with answering the questions.
Thank you very much for the question. So, if I understand you well, you said, to what extent can we say that, there is a decline of globalization, or how is the globalization process, and how can we measure it? Well, it's true that globalization has slowed down. In terms of, there is simple data, which is the share of global trade in global GDP. The percentage has declined over the past 10 years. Yes, so that's true. At the same time, the growth of global trade is much slower than it used to be. So these are signs of slowing down globalization, but perhaps some academics and others think that perhaps it's a kind of a normal phenomenon, is that after a hype, you kind of get on in a more, speed of cruise, which is a little bit normal. So that's the first way. Globalization has slowed down, but it has not, it's still there, basically. And if perhaps it's not globalization, definitely it's regionalization. The EU is a very good example, but then you have within Asia. For instance, China invests a lot in neighboring countries. Same thing in Latin America. Even if South Latin American continent is a little less, tight in terms of economic relations. They don't have an economic, a regional trade agreement in Latin America. But you have an example, you take Africa. African countries, when I was working in the UN, it took years. We were actually working with, within UNCTAD on this issue of a regional trade agreement. And now it has been adopted. It's a major step forward. It does not mean that things are going to change from today, from tomorrow, but it facilitates exchanges and harmonizes a number of practices within the continent. So globalization is going on, perhaps in a different shape, but perhaps more at the regional level, but definitely is there. The way to assess this is, as I said, to look at global trade compared to GDP. You look at the foreign direct investment flows, they still go on. They have declined a little bit after the COVID, but it's rebounding. So that, I think, are key elements which have to be taken into account. As far as reshoring is concerned, from what I read, and this is not necessarily academic papers, but more publication done by corporate researchers, like companies which are doing consulting for firms, for instance. But if you take, and this is also a source of information. You have to look at it because that's where the data are. That's where the example is if you work in business studies, for instance. And I think it's, I can't remember if it's a KPMG of McKinsey studies, but they say that the trend towards reshoring is not really, at least from developing an emerging economy to North economy, it's not really yet taken place. You have, for instance, if companies leave China, it's not necessarily to go back to the US or to Europe, it's to go, obvious example is Vietnam and Bangladesh. So I have really much more question marks about reshoring, actually, than globalization, definitely. I don't know, perhaps I give the second question can
Okay, so let's continue with answering questions. It was to Ida, yeah? Yeah.
I can try
that
question.
So,
Can IT team, can I have my slides back, please? I actually have 2 papers written in preparation to answer your question. But the larger question is, what era are we living in, right? Can let me have the remote? So we can debate, but I'm not an economist by training, as I said. So as a strategist, I tend to think from a company standpoint, from a top management standpoint. As the environment is changing, for sure, less global, what do we do, right? So one paper, there's no need to go through all these papers, right? So one paper is the paper to the right, Conglomeration, Deglobalization, and COVID-19. And the scope of the firm, remember, you probably do, but if you don't, let me remind you. Third fundamental question, what determines the scope of the firm? What is scope of the firm? It's geographical scope. Are you in how many countries? Or product scope, in how many product industries in which you are competing. So determining the product scope of the firm has been one of the leading fundamental questions in strategic management. And I think COVID-19 is the additional impact for deglobalization or slowdown of globalization. So what happened is the winds of globalization were pushing companies to downscope. Downscope means you are not able to compete across many countries, across many different industry lines. You'd better find your core competence areas and your leading markets in which you do better. If your company is from Europe, for sure you want to be strong in Europe. Only on that basis can you go to North America, Asia, Africa, great fun. But if you're not strong in Europe, I don't think you can be a strong multinational as an M&E headquartered in Europe. So that was the advice in much of the strategy research. Until now, we have the winds of deglobalization. So in these two papers, my colleagues and I essentially said, companies are not feeling that much extra pressure to downscope. In fact, if you look at Brexit, right? Britain left the EU. One of the economic benefits for British companies is enhanced trade barriers. Enhanced trade barriers would mean less strong British companies can continue to survive. Without Brexit, less strong British companies cannot face the onslaught of EU companies rushing over there. So in that regard, British companies in the post-Brexit era may feel less pressure to downscope. So that was one point. And of course, I encourage you to look into the details of the papers. I have another paper that I can quickly share. Where is it? Oh, this one. Left side, corporate diplomacy in the age of US-China rivalry. The word diplomacy, we all knew. And we don't even bother to add the word country diplomacy. Diplomacy, by definition, is between governments, right? But I think now, in this new era, companies, especially large ones, and executives, and I mean all these students, today you are students. Tomorrow you will not be executives, but in 10 years, 20 years, you may become executives. You will need to shoulder the responsibility of engaging in corporate diplomacy. Corporate diplomacy is different from country diplomacy. Countries between the United States and China, they can debate, hopefully they don't fight, but they can disagree. But if you were CEO of Apple, you are in both China and the United States, you'd better play a diplomatic function to hold hands of both President Xi and President Biden so that they don't be stupid and go do some real fighting. That is the power and the necessity of corporate diplomacy. And that's something we have not been paying attention because we tend to let company managers do business, let governments, let officials, let presidents do diplomacy. And I think in this new deglobalization era, companies, managers, executives have to do more corporate diplomacy to make sure corporate interests are being preserved. But by doing that, they are also linking these companies, linking these countries through trade and investment linkages so that things don't go out of hand. So these are my two answers. Hopefully they're useful. You don't need this, but.
Okay, so I think I would jump to the discussion. And before I try to answer the second question, I'd like to agree with what was said on economic diplomacy, because it's a very important issue, and it was not taken into account by many, because many people thought that we have country-country diplomacy or international organizations, but it happens at the corporate level and also at NGOs level with regards to the economic and environmental policy, and I think it's one of the the effects of current crisis situation, slow globalization, that we need more people in businesses also dealing with public administration and among themselves, just to reshuffle the scene. And coming to the second question, if I understood this well, well, we see several aspects. In Europe, we see the first issue, the consequences of Brexit and of some of the, I would say, inequalities that we have, an impact on people's living in the cities, in different regions, especially in the places that were neglected by the policy making. So it was lack of proper investment, lack of jobs in particular regions, and right now what we see, it's the rise of populism, and it is very dangerous for any kind of economic and societal life. So we see that at least at the European level and the country level, we see the responses in the policy. So we see new ways of dealing with the problems that were diagnosed. And we see also something at the global arena, I would say, especially with the rise of China, that we see completely different approach towards investment. Because if you compare, let's say, the European approach, Chinese approach, and other countries' approaches, so you see that EU is using so-called conditionality. So they will offer aid, financial aid or technical aid in order to develop places, but followed by some promises that you go in line with democratization of your political scene, lack of corruption, a sense of ownership of the investment. And in other cases, we don't see it. We see in the investment, but we see also this trade-off. So the countries are losing their resources. They are selling lands. For example, in Latin America, we see many places, many countries that decided to sell the land to Chinese government or companies in order to have money, to have public money, just to tackle with the problems, with societal problems, with these inequalities that are much higher than in Europe and also in the US. So we see different approaches, but well, at least this aim is the same, just to decrease the inequalities and improve the well-being of people. So the goal is common, but the approaches are different. But we see the competition of approaches, and now Europe is losing a bit, I would say, in many terms. But still, we see the problem inside, and we see the shift of both promoting of certain aspects and of the policy making. And we are talking a lot about geographies of this content. So it means that we have places that were really left and they are lagging behind the others. And this is the most problematic issue right now to be tackled under the policy making and in the policy making perspective. I don't know if it's the answer to your question, but this is a broad topic and there's also more question marks than the answers, but we see it, we discuss it in here. So thank you.
So thank you. Would you like to add to the question something, my dear professors?
Maybe I can ask you a question, Ida. So in response to that second question, I don't have an answer, but I have an additional question. The question is, in the face of rising inequality, is being less global a solution? Is raising economic barriers, trade barriers across different countries a way to solve the domestic inequality problem? I just don't see the link. Can you shed some light on this question?
I don't think so.
All right, that's fine. So basically, to solve domestic inequality, you will prefer continued, more open borders, right, for economic purposes, right?
Just maybe one comment. It's more like political issue with the protectionism, and this is also another aspect that is very much important, and also with the current situation that you see with war, with something that we haven't expected to have here in Europe again. So I think it's more like security issues raised and political questions, but for the economic development, I don't think that internal markets will be sufficient just to tackle, to give an answer and to help to reduce the inequality. You need cooperation. Maybe you need to focus on some aspects on trade of services, goods, and of course you need to regulate some issues, but you cannot stop the cooperation. I think it went too far, and the world is too much connected right now. So this is not the proper way of doing things. Thank you.
And if I may ask, at the global level, you were, speaking about, people being lifted out of poverty. We have to recognize that over the past 20 years, a number of countries have to some extent benefited in terms of growth. There has been a decreasing amount in percentage of the global population living in poverty and under poverty. And by the way, there has been almost a complete change of situation because of COVID. Hundreds of millions of people have been going back to poverty because of COVID and because of the restriction. But yes, opening and trade has been an engine of growth for many emerging economies. So the question mark is that if this engine of growth is not there any longer, what's going to happen? For those economies, it's a matter, it's an essential question, and we have to keep that in mind, I think.
So thank you very much, Professor Miroux, for the last answer. I mean, it will be the last answer during this session because we are almost close the first session. So thank you, Professor, for the excellent contribution to the discussion. So we know the perspective, your perspective of your research, also the topics and the scope of your research, and we touch and thank you very much for these questions. Because this question focused not only on globalization, but also on inequalities, differences, disparities, and cohesion. And in fact, this topic and these questions will bring us to the topic concerning impact on the society of your research. But we'll continue this discussion during the second session, and we must close the first session. And in a few minutes, we'll meet all together to the second session, focusing on the impact of the research on the society. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll meet during the second session.
1, 2. Okay, everybody, please. We are waiting for our panelists, but slowly we can take a seat and soon we will start. Anyway, because as far as I can see there, we have also some new students, so I have just few organizational informations for you. So the session is that organized that we will finish before the end of the classes which we will normally take. So please don't leave the aula before we end of this debate, and you will have enough time, like 10 minutes, to reach the next classes if you have today. So it will be better if you will stay here. And also one more thing, because some of you need the confirmation that you are not in the pub or somewhere else, but you are here. And so around 10 minutes or 15 minutes before the end of the session, on the screen you will find the QR code and you can scan it, and automatically you will be on the attendant list. So then you will receive this attendant list online. Well, this kind of solutions is more sustainable and more eco-friendly, so it will be very, very easy. So everyone who will stay till the end, you will have a chance to scan the QR code, and you will be automatically on the list, and the list will be delivered to you online. So we have all the panelists. Okay, great. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have a huge privilege to introduce to the second debate today. As you know, we discussed especially the topic concerning the international integration and all this global issue related to the integration of the different economies on the regional and on the global scale. We have fantastic professors from USA and from Poland, so you will have two different perspectives on this issue. So I would like to give the floor to Professor Małgorzata Dzimbała. She is the chair of this panel. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for your kind invitation. Also, I have the privilege to run the second session, which is devoted to the impact of economic research on society and best practice examples from North America. So once again, we have 2 rounds of questions. And let's start, I think that we will start with the first question concerning what is the impact of your research, or maybe the research which is conducted at your department, at your university, on society. What is your experience from America? Could you give us and could you share your opinion, your views? So shall we start once again with the same order and with Professor Mike Peng?
Thank you. First, we have to impact academia. One measure of impact is citations. Do other scholars cite your work, right? So I think I'm very proud to share with you that other scholars worldwide have been citing some of our work, and increasingly so. And I would encourage more of you to cite our work. So we claim that we are growing a tree. That is our impact. Okay, an academic tree, a family of theories. It's no longer just one view. So we have an institution-based view of corporate governance, an institution-based view of corporate diversification. That's the scope of the firm I just mentioned. Institution-based view of entrepreneurship, intellectual property rights, international business strategy, and large family firms. So that is one example, and I think the impact is we are influencing future research agenda. So we could do an IBV of corporate social responsibility, competitive dynamics, hybrid organizations, and deglobalization and sanctions. That's the heart of one of the previous questions, right? Let me skip a few slides. Some other examples, right? So we talk about the growth of the firm. Impact. Another piece of impact, a dimension of impact, is impacting students. We talked about impacting academic researchers. So these books are disseminated and studied by students in over 50 countries. So I'll just show some examples. So there is this Portuguese edition, there's a paperback, Chinese edition, Spanish edition, and then European edition. In Europe, we have this thing marketed as international business, and we went to India as well. So I think these are pieces of evidence of impact. Some other work regarding impact is really consulting, directly impacting company managers, practitioners, and policymakers. So I've done some work with different multinationals, such as AstraZeneca, MTR. MTR is Mass Transit Railway in Hong Kong. But if you take any subway in London or Stockholm, Sweden, MTR is operating some of the subway systems in London and Stockholm. So MTR is in Hong Kong, but it is also a multinational, global. And there's Texas Instruments, NGOs with US-China Business Council, US-India Chamber of Commerce, governments ranging from a suburb of Dallas, city of Plano, to Hong Kong Research Council, UK Government Office for Science, and international organizations. So I think these are some useful evidence of impact, I guess. I'll stop here. Thank you.
And the same question to Professor Miroux. I think that is working without.
Okay, yeah, that one is working. First, thank you very much. And talking about the impact of our research on society, which is more than social impact, because impact on society may be social element, but also governance and so on. There are, in a way, there are basically three avenues which come to my mind. Is that first, through your relationship with the academics and how you can contribute to developing theories or confront your theories, and like a snowball rolling. There is a relationship with the students, and perhaps that's where we see the more direct and visible impact in terms of societies by conveying to students messages that you feel are very, very important, which actually will translate later on in their professional life. What's very important, in my view, is to give a critical mind to the students so that they don't take for granted whatever they see, whatever they read. That's a key issue. And the other channel is through policy making, the relationships that you have either with national governments. It's a little bit more not difficult, but it all depends upon the context of the country, or the international organization, as I mentioned a moment ago. So these three channels are very, very important, and whatever you study, you can, there are three avenues through which your ideas can, in a way, impregnate constituencies. Now, in terms of example, I just mentioned two examples of studies that we have been doing with my colleague Lourdes Casanova, which are related to sustainable development. One is an exercise that we did last year, which was about trying to see to what extent sustainable development through ESG concept was developing or spreading in emerging markets. And I would say that this is just the beginning of a journey. So ESG stands as, I guess you know, environment, social, and governance. And there are increasingly ESG criteria which are, or requirements, which are put on the companies on the part of investors. And that opens a huge Pandora box about the validity of the criteria and all the debate about greenwashing. Anyway, so last year what we did an exercise on enterprises from emerging markets, and we wanted to have an idea of what was going on. And so what we did is that we used a score given by rating agencies on ESG elements of about 2,000 companies from emerging markets. All the details all the technicalities are in the emerging market multinational report that we have published at TMI last year. But the bottom line is that we ended up with a group of 200 companies which were performing well. But the more important thing was the journey, the process. And for instance, there is something that which was so flagrant, is that the lack of data on environmental, social, and governance performance on firms from emerging markets. Developed firms are relatively well covered. For instance, you have Bloomberg, which has sustainability indexes, FTSE. You have. When you go to emerging markets, much more difficult. We found a Chinese data bank, which is called WIND, which covers Chinese, but for other countries, much more difficult. And there are two reasons for it. The first is that the importance of state-owned enterprises from emerging markets, so you don't have publicly available data. They are not quoted, so they don't have to have annual reports for the investors. Or you have family business, in particular in Latin America. So where do the information come from? So this is the first thing. And the second thing, which corporate social responsibility and ESG is an Anglo-Saxon centered concept, actually. So it is not necessarily apprehended the same way in, for instance, emerging market. Sometimes the idea is alien. Corporation, we talk about philanthropy and so on. So people are not used to report on what they are doing, even if they are doing well. So you have an unbalanced field. So it's very difficult to do that. Yes, these companies are doing better than others. So the conclusion is that yes, we have a group of companies which appear to do well, but at the end of the day, there is a major problem at the root of the exercise, which is a lack of data, the comprehension of the concept. And also something which, you know, to some extent, and I would tend to think about that, is that corporate social responsibility, ESG, perhaps is a second best. And I'll say why. We looked at countries and companies. In our exercise, we found that companies from Thailand and South Africa were comparatively doing relatively well. So in our starting sample, we had about 60% of Chinese companies, like 10% of Indian and so on. And we had 2% from Thailand and 2% from South Africa. In the group of the relatively well-performing company, South Africa and Thailand were the number 2 and number 3 country in terms of number of good citizen companies, each with 12 and 13%. So we were kind of surprised. We said, oh, perhaps the data is wrong. And we kept on in common. And actually, we looked at, and we also looked at the policies of the country. Interestingly, in emerging economy, Thailand and South Africa are the 2 countries which have a relatively well-organized network of regulations. Thailand is environment for obvious reason, tourism, and social. And South Africa is social of governance, because you have the heritage of the apartheid regime, which had to be dealt with, and also you have governance codes, they are called the King Codes. So these 2 countries who had a relatively good network of regulation, the companies were doing relatively well. So we found that was an interesting conclusion, which opened up, and that could be a question, is there a relationship with the level of regulatory regulation and laws and the performance of the enterprises? I think this is a key question for corporate social responsibility and ESG, especially nowadays. So we did that last year, and this year we also did, again, in the perspective of sustainability, we did a ranking of countries, and that's another approach. We want to show that even if emerging economy, if you benchmark them versus developed economies, you always have the idea that they are not doing so well. But you have to take into account the efforts so that you have a progressive and an encouraging approach. And that's what we did this year by doing an index of countries, our E20+1 group. And this index combines economic development and then ESG performance. I will stop there, but I encourage you to go to our 2 reports where you will have all the details. And as I say, the conclusion is one thing, but the journey in terms of research is, in our view, what also matters.
So thank you very much for your contribution. And what about the impact of society of the Polish research and Polish perspective? And in fact, as I underline the international one, because as you realize, the research must be reflected into the society. So the society should be also the recipient of the research and also absorb this research somehow. So what is your experience?
Okay, so I'll try to show you. Well, the first set of, impact and channels, apart from academic impact that was already mentioned, it goes mainly first through network of colleagues. It's done through scientific associations that very often also involve practitioners, businesses, and just citizens. So in our area, it's mainly Regional Studies Association, and we have a network, and this is research network on cohesion policy called CPNet, where we try to organize not only scientific events, but we also open the workshops to, as I mentioned before, to the policy makers. We invite them, and they are providing contributions as well. So we have this opportunity to confront scientific findings with the real-life evidence. And then we have a discussion, and this very much is liked by both sides, because we can see later on if anything is translated into practice. So this is one of the channels and organizations that I'm involved in. I'm a coordinator of the CPNet right now, so we are going to continue with our works, and also Professor Małgorzata Dziębała is a part of our organization, so she knows exactly how it works. And also there are other scientific organizations. They do pretty much the same. They are international, so they are not only Polish-based associations, which is better, because then you have a possibility to present Polish perspectives, but also to learn from the others. So this is good. But also, of course, we are using this Polish scientific societies very often just to present our work and to try to influence somehow the policy making. Then I was involved in consultation with Polish Parliament in the past, and also with the Senate, when we provided expertise in different fields related to economic integration, to operation of common market, internal market of the EU. So it was also very much appreciated. And what is more right now, we are very often as scholars invited to be a part of consultative bodies to regional authorities. This is something in the regional policies that we call operational programs. So there are documents that allows you to spend the money for public investment. And there are bodies called the monitoring committees, consisted of businesses, NGOs, scholars, public administration. So we have a broad representation of different groups. And we have an impact on the criteria for the projects to be chosen to be co-financed. So this is a huge impact, I would say, because we can, basing on our knowledge and on our research findings, we can propose something to the legislation, and this is very strong an instrument. And is also widely used, not only in Poland, it's the same in the whole European Union, because the structure is the same. It's regulated by European regulations. However, this is how we can contribute to the daily life of people. even by setting a certain criteria, so we can decide if the project fits to the general objectives, if they are sustainable, if they bring benefits, longer benefits to the society or not. So, of course, we have discussions and we do not agree on everything, but this is a quite interesting forum just to express the ideas and also bring our point of view to this process. And besides, we have also consultancy. At our university, we have a knowledge transfer company that cooperates strongly with many companies from different sectors, and our colleagues are invited to provide either a strategy for businesses or a strategy for administration, or we also provide trainings for, we also involve students in these works. So very often it's joint research or just like a consultancy job, prepared by professors and their students. So they can also have business experience while they are studying. So I think it's a very useful tool that is in place in Poznań at our university. We also provide training programs, the extramural programs mainly for professionals. So this is also how you sell your knowledge to people. They're coming from different businesses, different entities, and people are coming at different stages of their life because sometimes you need to change your competences. So you are coming to postgraduate programs and just shifting your professional life. And this is also the channel and way of impacting on people with your knowledge, scientific knowledge, but also practical knowledge. You know how to apply it, and you are just providing this knowledge to the students. It's not only MBA; it's also a different set of programs that we have in place. And also media interviews and participation in public debates, especially like in here, for example. This is one of the examples, as well as it's broadcasted, it's streamlined, so we can have an impact on other people who are interested in such issues. So I think it is also another way of delivering kind of impact. Also classes, like for regular students. So we are also sharing not only like basic fundamentals of our knowledge, but also are trying to show you how it can be applicable to your daily life, to your professional life. So this is also another way of impacting on people. And also like seminars for the colleagues. So I think that there are major issues I wanted to raise in this part. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your contribution. It reminds me about my practical experience also, being an expert of the Ministry of Regional Development for the elaboration of the regional programs concerning cross-border cooperation. So it was also my good example of the impact of the research. So my knowledge, let's say, was reflected into the operational program. In that sense, I make a contribution. And I closely cooperate with the regional authorities and also with the regional authorities from cross-border authorities, let's say from the Czech Republic and Slovak Republic as well. So in fact, we just more and more pay and focus on this impact, because as we know, as we realize, the impact can be diversified in different spheres, in different fields, and also it says we can underline it's not only the economic impact, but also can be visible on different levels. And I think that our guest has a great experience in giving us some good examples. So let's turn and let's move to another questions, do the second round of questions concerning could you give us some examples of social impacts, the best examples, just right from America, and also not only from America, but maybe from Poland as well. So the sequence is the same, the order is the same, so...
Okay, I'll try. I'll give you two examples, okay? One, not very effective. One, hopefully effective, okay? So I have to go through. Okay, here we go. So, 4 fundamental questions, right? So we talked about fundamental question 1, why do firms differ? Fundamental question 2, how do firms behave? Third one is what determines the scope of the firm, right? Fourth one is what determines the success and failure of firms around the globe. So in one summary, one figure, one visual representation, we essentially said, we focus on that question, and there are many ways, and you spent, what, 3-4 years trying to answer that question, right? Well, we argue that you need only these 2 views. One is resource-based view. What's unique, what's specific about what you can contribute as a company, what you can provide as an individual contributor. No one else can do it. Only you can do it. So the one on top is institution-based view. So what are institutions' rules of the game, right? Formal rules, laws, regulations, informal norms, ethics, and cultures. So it's the combination of both, resulting in this way to answer the question. Basically, we said, if you want to understand company performance on a worldwide basis, start with these 2 views. Of course, you can add your analysis, all right? Now, here comes the fun part. 9 years ago, the UK government found me, okay? Most consulting work has to remain confidential, but this particular consulting project is in the public domain as long as we gave credit. So Crown copyright, that's how you cite it. It is available, this whole report is available, okay? So the UK government discovered me and my colleague Klaus Meyer, who is the co-author of my European adaptation. My hypothesis is some students studied my book, and these students went to join the UK government, and they found me. So it was a massive UK government project. I was the only US-based expert. So the dependent variable is markets for UK manufacturing output, in particular, made in UK products. Made in UK products. Okay, here's the fun part. Colleagues, students, here, everybody. How many of you currently are using or wearing anything made in UK? Now, anyone? Anything? One more time, repeat the question. Anyone right now wearing or using, including or drinking anything made in the UK? Your silence is your answer. Thank you very much. And I just read the university's history. So we have a proud history of 85 years, right? So imagine in the year 1937, okay, all of us, 85 years older. Whatever age you are, okay? 85 years older, the first class of this great university in the year 1937, November, what day is today? November 16th or whatever, right, today. 1937. Answer my question. Would you be wearing anything made in UK in that class, the first class of this university, 1937? Wearing, using. At that time, every male student will have to come to class like this. You have to wear a nice jacket, a good tie, and you have to have better looking shoes, okay? And everybody will have to have a fountain pen, nice paper pad. I would imagine some of you will be wearing something made in UK, right? Using something made in UK, right? The UK export market share in a class like this, I hypothesize 100 years ago, will be above 0. Would you like to support my hypothesis? Because I've done this in many, many classes worldwide. Okay, do we have it? We have no one from the UK now, right? Okay, all right, so here's the answer. Why do people not using made in UK products today? Okay, number 1, resource-based view. Made in UK products have to deliver the value in comparison with other products delivering similar value. Imagine this pen. 100 years ago, it could have been made in the UK. Today, it probably is made in China. Okay, so at this price point, you're not buying that pen made in UK. All right, got it? And then institution-based view, don't forget why UK was able to have a much bigger market share in its export output. Not only because of the wonderful product value delivered by made in UK products, but institution-based view. Much of the world was ruled by the UK in the year 1937. You go to India, you go to South Africa, okay? These were UK colonies. So folks in India, in South Africa at that time, could not buy other stuff made in other countries unless these other pens, other shoes, other jackets, other ties came to these markets, overcoming tariff barriers. Remember, that was why we Americans fought for the War of Independence. So we no longer had to do this under this institution-based control by the UK, right? Okay, so it's a combination of both. Made in UK products at that time had a much bigger market share. Number one, delivered by the product value. That can be explained by the resource-based view. But number two, we have to look at the institution-based view. Imagine much of the world was controlled by the UK. Okay, so now 100 years have passed. The largest UK colony is now the British Virgin Islands, right? So essentially all gone. No big markets under the UK control. And then from an informal institutional based view, Poland was never colonized by the UK, but I would imagine 100 years ago, students and colleagues in this class would feel it was cool to consume something made in the UK, right? Because other colleagues, prestigious people, are consuming products made in the UK. You want to look good, you want to look cool, so you consume made in UK products. That is gone now today. Made in UK products, I'm sorry, is no longer cool according to this class, according to you, right? And number two, made in UK products were still exporting to the rest of the EU, thanks to UK EU membership. Our project was to look at UK products in China, Russia, India, Mexico, emerging markets. Everybody said these were the hot markets of the future. Let's target these markets. And we took a detailed look at the data of UK products in China. Made in UK products was number 26 in China. Number 26, meaning there are 25 countries exporting more products to China than the UK, led by the United States, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, blah, 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 blah. So even if UK doubled its export market share of products to China, becoming number 13, will that help? Yes. But will that make a huge impact? No. So UK products, we advise the UK government, benefited from EU membership. So the policy conclusion is, regardless of how much growth you can have in China, India, South Africa, you will still, geography is destiny, you will still benefit from your EU membership. And remember, the year was 2013, and the idiots did not listen, they got out of the EU. That was the end of our story. So we made money as consultants, and the rest of the UK, shall I go on? I don't need to. Institution-based view, okay? Totally ignoring consulting reports. So that's example one, not very effective. But we did our best, okay? Convincing the idiots, but did not listen. Okay, now, the year was 2017. President Trump became the new president. He said NAFTA is the worst trade deal that he will smash. And NAFTA is with the United States, Mexico, and Canada, right? So everybody was terrified. What if President Trump delivered what he threatened? He often means it. So I wrote this article to publish in the Dallas Morning News. So I wrote lots of boring academic papers, okay, very long, but this is very short and readable, only one page. So basically, in this major newspaper in Texas, the question is, what happens to Texas if the U.S. withdraws from NAFTA? Answer one, relax, trading will still continue, okay? Geography, again, is destiny. The city where I come from, Dallas, Texas, is geographically midway between Canada and Mexico. We go northeast 1,300 miles or 2,000 kilometers. That will reach Toronto. We go south, same distance, 1,300 miles, 2,000 kilometers. That will be Mexico City. So Texas as a state is the biggest state benefiting from NAFTA. So if we lose NAFTA, we will still trade, but we will lose a lot of the gains from trade, and economic prosperity will be less. And number two, I wanted to remind people in the White House that Texas is the #1 state that sent President Trump to the White House. We are the #1 red state. All right? So I also wrote another article to Texas CEO magazine, very similar. What happens if NAFTA goes away? Okay? So same idea. So we have to remind people in the White House, but White House did not discover me. So we do things indirectly. So publishers of the Texas CEO magazine had a special issue about NAFTA, just to tell people, tell all readers, all stakeholders, how wonderful NAFTA has contributed. In the beginning, that documentary, I think that student character from this university is called Hela, right? She said the North American unemployment rate was 10%. Maybe so for the entire continent. But for Texas, we only have 4% unemployment rate, otherwise known as full employment, in part because of NAFTA. So we have to remind people in the White House that if they took away those benefits, economic prosperity could be undermined, and we people in Texas may no longer want to vote someone into the White House. So every member of the Texas congressional delegation received a copy of the magazine. Hopefully they read it. Hopefully that influenced their work. And hopefully that made President Trump to do something like this. He said, I'm going to smash NAFTA. But instead of just smashing it, broken into all pieces, I'm going to replace this with USMCA, regarded as US-Mexico-Canada agreement. So the majority of the provisions in NAFTA continued. So we all breathe easier. So all these efforts were not for nothing. The efforts for the UK government were like for nothing. We just made a little money as consultants. So thanks very much. These are two examples.
So what about your experience, Professor Miroux?
Thank you. First, if it would be possible for the technicians to bring back the first presentation I had today. If not, I will, if it's possible.
Please check.
I will, I just, in waiting for that, I just mentioned this morning, just a moment ago, our relationship with the policymakers, and for instance, in terms of, we have very close relationship when we do our report with the OECD, EMNet. They have a network of basically practitioners from emerging market, and it's an interesting outlet within the OECD. So basically it's a special, within the OECD, it's a unit which brings into the discussion representative of the private sectors, and you have around the table academics, like us, we contribute, policymakers, delegates, and private sector representatives. So that's a way to have an impact. It's not that presentation, so I will continue. There are two direct examples that I'd like to mention. Is first the way we, the impact we have our society, for instance, through our students. In the institute, our students, they are engaged in what they call majors in the United States, and their participation in the institute is because they want a particular focus on these specific issues, which is emerging market. So we have students which are from Cornell Tech who are working in engineering and very technical issues. So our social impact to some extent is for those students which may be less exposed to economic or legal or sustainable issues, is for us to share our concerns, for instance, or our idea with them. So that's very important. And the other one element also that I wanted to mention is we organize every year an annual conference. We were talking a moment ago about the kind of dissemination that you can do. This type of exercise that you are doing is essential because it puts you also on the global map. You know, this is very, very important. Nowadays, if you are not visible on the internet, one way or another, you are almost non-existing. And it breaks my heart to say that because I have a little problem with social media to some extent. I have my own opinions, I'm extremely critical, but you have to recognize that this kind of meeting is essential. It puts you on the global map. People will know that in the University of Katowice, you know, you are open to the world. So it's good for the exterior and it's good also for the student in terms of impact. Not tomorrow, but perhaps the day after tomorrow. So the impact on society is not a short term, it's a medium term and long term impact. That's why your question is very difficult, by the way. So in Cornell, we're organizing this annual conference, and what my colleagues, Lourdes Carzanova, launched 2 years ago, she launched what's called a case competition. And actually, I encourage you to participate as you know, it's a business exercise. A case is put on the table. There is a process. You register, you prepare a case, and there are laureates and so on. Again, through the case, we also convey ideas because the judges of the case take into account not only the business aspect but also other elements, and it's a way to transfer our expertise and our knowledge. So I really, that's something that's also one way to have impact on society through the work that you are doing. So there is a content, and then there is a channel, the dissemination. And by the way, I was very interested by the examples that Professor Peng gave, because in a way it shows that it's one thing to have a very lengthy academic papers, but what made the difference apparently is the apparition in the newspapers. So perhaps for research and academics, we may have to think of being more present in the press. In the US, you have, for instance, Paul Krugman, who writes quite often, and it's a delight to read him. He has perspective, and I think it has an impact on society. Or you have also Joseph Stiglitz in the French press, in the Monde. You have also, once in a while, academics writing, not enough, unfortunately. So that's a way of having a social impact also. And I'd like to, I thought your example was quite vivid and quite interesting from that point of view. But perhaps the most direct impact that we have now is, I would say, through our students. And I hope it works.
So the presentation is ready. If you would like to use it,
What is? No, it was just. Okay. It was just because, as I said, we have the education, so we have the major and the minor, we have the outreach to the conference, and we have the research and the knowledge. And as I said a moment ago, we involve very directly students in our work, so that the closer relationship is very important.
So thank you. And what about Professor Musiałkowska? What is your examples of social impacts?
I decided to pick up a few examples. One is related to our work research project that I mentioned in the previous session. After we published a paper on the Jessica initiative used in the cities, we were called by Euractiv portal, which is European media portal, very widely recognized, and they asked us for an interview on this because they wanted to deliver the message to the European citizens and as well to the policymakers because they are based in Brussels. So it was one of the examples how you can be recognized in in the society, let's say, by delivering your research. So you know that the journalists and media people are also researching what you are doing. So this is also something that is encouraging to some extent. So it was one of the examples. And the interview was published, and we saw that there were many entries and downloads of some materials that were published on the website of this journal. So we also were talking about successes and failures of the policy as such, because it was a part of a book. We coded it, and there was also dissemination of our work put together by scholars from Europe. Another example I wanted to mention is a position paper that we wrote on the role of the cohesion policy in the COVID. And we, firstly, we addressed the issue of the main purpose of the cohesion policy as such, and then we saw the discrepancy because the instruments were used in the crisis times. So they were not used always for the purpose that they were meant to be. So we also left the message that if we want to have such an attitude, we either need to increase the allocations for the cohesion policy, or we should propose other instruments, because otherwise we cannot continue with achieving the goals that were predicted in the European Union, in the regulations, in the treaties. And we published this on this Regional Studies Association website, and everybody has an access to that. And we also promoted it during conferences as a scholars that signed this and prepared this position paper. It was not very long, like one pager with several points, so it was easy to read and to somehow remember what's the most important message. And this is another way how you can impact either the society or public sphere or even private companies. And I think it's also good to do things like that. And also related to COVID, we have a cooperation with the Mexican university, which is La UNAM, from the city of Mexico. And last year we organized 4 seminars showing the impact of COVID on different aspects of economics and business. So we had firstly this international cooperation online, because of course it was during the pandemic, so we didn't manage to meet each other. However, with the colleagues from Mexico, we presented a different perspective, and it also opens up again this issue mentioned in the previous sections, that we have completely different views, that the problems are seen differently, that you can propose different solutions to a problem given the context that you are facing. So it was extremely rich, I think, also for our colleagues from the university, when you see that the problems are like put differently, and you have to think differently on different elements, on economic systems, on the measures that you provide, on the assistance that you provide, or how you incentivize the businesses to operate after the crisis or during the crisis. So I would say that it was something very important, not only personally to me, but also for the others, just to have this comparative visions and insights into the problems. And this is still available on social media, on YouTube, of both universities. So if you are interested, you can just find the recordings of these seminars in the website. So this is another channel I didn't mention before, but it was mentioned by both of you just minutes ago. So it was another element related to the COVID situation. And the last example, it's not on the slide, but it came to my mind when we've been talking about involving students. We had a project as the university, as this transfer knowledge company, and regional authorities called Odra Hackathon. So firstly, we picked up the groups of students or any interested people who wanted to participate in this competition. They were given a short diagnosis of the overall situation in our region, which is called Wielkopolska, and the German region. And they picked up the problem and they needed to research this problem. And later on, in the later phase, there was training provided by the experts to the groups. And they proposed the solution during 2 days workshops. So it was really interesting to see the proposal of these solutions, because later on I was in the jury of this competition. We picked up the winners, and because it was co-funded by the regional authorities of both regions and also from the ministry. We had an opportunity to implement this solution. So it was one of the application. I have to say that our students won the competition, but it was nothing to do with me in the jury. But still, it was one of the best proposals that we got in this. And then they implemented the application to solve a part of the intergenerational societal problems that we face in both places. So this is another example how you can involve people into your work, and how you can have an impact by implementing certain solutions. So I would say that those 4 examples are enough for this session. Thanks.
So thank you very much for the contribution. It reminds me about the involvement of my department, because we would like to disseminate the knowledge and the research which are working with my colleagues at the department among our students. And one of the examples, it was just the example of the research, because at my department we were conducting a survey and we collected data and on the effect and impact of pandemic on the Polish exporters. And of course, apart from the book that we published together with my colleagues, we just decided to involve our students to elaborate the report on the impact. And some of the students are sitting in the auditorium, and I could recognize the face, and they were working together for some months. And this report was appeared on the website of the university, as well on the website of our department. And the contributors to the report are not only my team, but also my dear students who are deeply involved in the work of our department. And also the results of these reports were presented to the wider audience, to the regional authorities. In fact, during the interview, simply. So I think the impact on the society is visible. And let me give you another example of the involvement of my students into the competition. Because we just cooperate with the American students. I mean, my students there are once again some faces in the auditorium. I could recognize that they won the competition. I mean, just they took the second or just the third place, competing with the students also from America, from the other countries, and there were also the winner. And in fact, they transmitted their knowledge into the competition, and also they were awarded the prize. And also the reviewers of their work was the company. Yes, so this was not the academic. These were not the academics, but the company that appreciated their work. So I think that these 2 examples from my department shows us that in fact we try to deeply involve our students, and also we are thinking about the society on the impact of the research, because in this way we would like to introduce our international perspective into the regional perspective as well. And so this is our examples, and I think that we must turn to the session of questions. Yes, are there any questions from the audience concerning the American perspective into the research techniques and on the impact of the society?
Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, so please.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation. It was very interesting. Bridging the two conversations today, the first one, there was a discussion on the value of open trade. And certainly I think you mentioned that, especially with emerging markets, especially with the challenges of COVID-19 and its impact, that without increased trade, right, that growth in emerging economies will be difficult. But I think it was also mentioned that there's inequality and some individuals are left behind. And then on this conversation on impact, you gave some great examples of trying to influence, right, the decision to go with open trade, but not being successful. Do you think there's something greater that can be done from an impact perspective of trying to convince, right, the public institutions of the value of open trade, given that you've talked about the benefits of it?
I'll have a quick answer. In the magazine article I actually wrote, so let me quote, "Free trade is not free." Meaning it takes more of us to continuously repeat the message. There are gains from trade. Don't forget Adam Smith, 1776. But it didn't take Adam Smith 1 year to have his ideas be accepted. By the 1820s and 1830s, the British passed their Corn Laws to fully embrace to start to embrace Adam Smith's free trade ideas. It took about 50 years. So the point is, I think for all of us who are pro-global trade, we need to constantly be repeating the message. Education is about reinforcement. Many of us have kids. When we teach our kids, young kids, you tell them once, they're not going to follow. And all students here are younger than us, right? We teach them do one thing, do they do it every day? No, they don't do it. So we'll have to repeat the message as educators, right? No, I think this is the point. Free trade is not free. Because if we didn't, I mean, my dean is not going to like this work I'm doing, right? He said, "Mike, why are you not publishing journal articles, right? Writing these, two-page or one-page position papers, right? It's fun, it's short, but I think we need to spend some time. I think, and you mentioned that, and Ida, you mentioned that as well. I think more of us need to do more of this direct translation work. We got to constantly repeat the message, and the other message we're saying is reducing domestic inequality is an important policy agenda, but smashing free trade deals is not a good solution, right? If you want to go for direction A, go to direction A. Don't go to direction B. Imagine if we lose free trade deals, the #1 US company is Walmart stores. And who are the customers in Walmart stores? Primarily people whose income levels are not very, very high. And if we ban all the products made in China, as our President Trump at one point threatened to do, is he going to help these shoppers at Walmart when every price of every product at Walmart goes up thanks to the China tariffs? Therefore, if he's trying to help, restricting free trade or restricting trade is just not a good solution. And it's very simple. But I think we just need to constantly mention that and deliver that and disseminate that so that eventually that message will sink in. So that's my answer.
Would you like to add something?
Just on that, fully agree with you, and in a way, but the issue is that free trade has many advantages, but also it has had constraints. And in the moment where the population especially for instance in European countries, is the moment we saw that we were losing out something, that's when we began reacting. And the difficulty, the challenge is to try to combine the two. And we talk about adapting skills, adapting education and so on, but it takes time. And in the short term, people are realizing, for instance, that they are losing jobs and so on. And perhaps it has been the pace of the change which has been so fast, that the adaptation has taken time. So it's for countries who used to be powers in the world, is a little bit difficult to see that the basis of powers are slowly eroding and that you have to make an additional effort to keep up with what you used to do. So yes, free trade is not free, and the problem is that, yes, we have seen, especially in recent years, that the quick fix. But the quick fix is not the solution. But politically, it takes time. And in the political time, it's the years can't double to some extent.
Maybe one comment. The policymakers and politicians are different animals, I would say. So it's really difficult to have this momentum to have an impact on the decisions to be made. The only thing is just for us to educate, still, if it's just like a common word used in here, and to disseminate the knowledge maybe to the private business fora, to NGOs, and they can have an impact and pressure over the governments and policymakers. Otherwise, we will not reach this goal, because we see the problem, but well, the political issue is another history. But maybe also we can use the experience with the COVID-19, where we saw that faster reactions were possible because it was a threat to public health in the whole world, and we saw that some processes can be sped up. So maybe this will be the example to follow, that we are not coming back to the business as usual, but we are learning from this experience. The pandemic is not over, but we see that some reactions were faster, especially here in Europe, at the European level, that the countries came to some conclusions, to some agreements, and it didn't take 2 years as usual in decision making at the EU level, but it was like a month, 2 months, so it can be done faster. But there is another question, if there is a will to continue with this trend.
So thank you. I noticed a question from Professor Małgorzata Pańkowska. I think she would like.
Thank you so much. You mentioned a lot about the COVID. So my question is mostly to the professor from United States. What was the impact, what is still the impact of COVID on the economics and also on research? I think you can give us a lot of examples, but my question is what we have learned. What positive, I would say, experience have been gathered, and particularly I'm thinking about the future, how they could be utilized in the future, these experiences gathered because of COVID. Yeah, thank you.
A couple quick answers. One is resilience. Resilience becomes a hot research topic. You do Google Scholar search, you just do generic Google search, resilience. Another one is to revive an old research topic, organizational slack. What is slack? Slack is something we don't use now. To the human body, I'm sorry to say, slack is the fat in our human body, slack. As much as we'd like to reduce fat as humans, can we imagine we can function with a zero fat body? If you have zero fat, you are hit by COVID, you die right away. So slack, that fat in the human body, is what's helping you. So companies don't like to talk about this. They like to talk about stockpiles. They like to talk about inventories. It's a supply chain issue, because now just-in-time management is no longer in fashion. Just-in-time management, JIT, I think we all studied, was pioneered by the Japanese, became popular in the 80s and 90s. because you have super responsive global supply chains, right? As an automaker, you don't have to keep a large inventory of components. Your just-in-time delivery of components can go into your factory and put the components directly onto the car that you're trying to make. That's awesome. But then, what if you have transportation disruption? What if you have an earthquake in Japan? And what if you have a lockdown in China? Then the solution is you have to enhance your stockpiles, right? And for companies, you enhance your stockpiles. For governments, and for individual households, we'll have to prepare some face masks, right? Remember, face masks were in such a shortage 2 years ago, right? So the lesson is every organization needs to have some stockpiles. So in strategic management, we've been doing this research. How much is too much in terms of organizational slack? Managers don't like to do this, but we are scholars. We can call this organizational slack. So now we're talking about just-in-case management. Just in case you need extra face masks. As a country, just in case, you may need to have more tanks and more missiles, right? In case something happens. So just in case management. I think all militaries are just in case forces for every country. When there's no war, every military becomes organizational slack. But no country is dumb enough to disarm in peacetime, right? So organizational slack. But how much organizational slack you keep, no one can say the more slack, the better, right? So basically what we are learning is relative to the pre-COVID level, we must maintain as country governments, as universities, as companies, as individual households, we must maintain a higher level of slack. And you can call this these inventories, supplies, stockpiles, components, weapons, face masks, what have you. I think that is another important learning point we're getting. So the research about organizational slack, what is the optimal level, right? There's got to be an optimal level beyond which additional stockpiles will destroy value. But zero slack is not reasonable, it's not practical. So the optimal amount is basically between 0 and somewhere in the middle. You need to find that point. So that's another point I can share.
Just building, I mean, you mentioned resilience. Yes, now it's a key word. We read it everywhere. It's a complete change of paradigm. Before it was efficiency, now it's resilience. How do you build the resilience? By diversifying your sources and so on. But I think, I won't elaborate on that point. I'd rather, in terms of the consequences and how things have changed, I think it has brought back the state in the picture. Because we had this, how could I say, this idea that not only leave it to the market forces, but basically the state should intervene as less as possible. Industrial policies were a little bit out of fashion in a way. And with COVID, everybody turned to the state to help. Basically, all countries, I mean, the United States, had a huge program to help the population. I'm not even speaking about the EU, where the budgetary constraint suddenly was lifted from one day to the others. So yes, it was because it was a catastrophe, but it also changed the mindset because people and corporations turn to the states. So the role of the state in that change, in terms of perceptions, has changed substantially, and that will have also implication for the future. And the role of the budget and the budgetary element in the running of the economy, came back to the fore. And I'm also mentioning industrial policies because now we are talking about industrialization policies. Suddenly, as if something, from day one we discovered that, I'm talking about the country I come from, which is France, we had lost a lot of industries. I mean, it's just that we realized it. And when I say we, I say the population, the public in general. So now we are talking about industrial policies, which was a word which for a couple of decades were pushed away because the state should not interfere. So it's a different mindset, I think, that we have to realize. And this, I believe, is going to have a lasting effect. And by the way, I believe that the coffee crisis definitely had an impact on global value chain and so on. But the crisis that we are going through now with the war in Ukraine will have an impact which may even be more long-lasting because with the COVID crisis, I would say almost the global community was around. You know, everybody agreed in the same direction. Nowadays, it's not that clear. You have parties or factions, and so that's why it is making more difficult, but the consequences, I think, will be as severe, perhaps more severe, because it's bringing back in the equation of the global value chain energy and distance that we had completely forgotten. So the whole equation is changing, and the uncertainty actually is the word of the day.
Contribute to this question, to the impact, yeah. No, Polish perspective as well, European one, because you put a position paper on the cohesion policy. Yeah, as I'm right.
Yeah, so I think that I mentioned it before, that well, we also see the similar trends that, well, we use the state aid to a bigger extent, and we saw many shields in order to help companies to operate in the COVID. So it was an unprecedented scale, especially in Poland, and we see consequent economic consequences of this with the higher rates of inflation as well. But we see this shift and the involvement of public authorities in reactions to the crisis. And what I also see is that we are living, or we've been starting to live under the permanent crisis. So this is, it was the financial and economic crisis in 2007-8, and then we have a big migration crisis here in Europe, and we also have right now the consequences of the COVID-19 and the war. So we have a complete shift of priorities, I would say, at different scales. It's companies, it's public administration, there are people who are living in the country. So we need to think differently on our life. So I think resilience is still the buzzword, as well as sustainability. And what I also see as a bit contradictory, the trends. We are going to this climate and digital transformation that are must, but at the same time, because you were asking about the inequalities in the previous session, but it will also, those transformations, they will increase inequalities. So now it's the question how to balance the transitions that are ongoing with the societal problems. So this is just like a more comment to the current situation, but this is also what we see on the arena.
Yeah, it's just, I would like to add some comments that in fact the COVID is like the factor, non-economic factor that they contributed to this, not the crisis, but the not stable situation. And another just non-economic factor is the war in Ukraine. So what we observe that there are more and more different factors outside the economic box, which have the impact on our economics. Yeah. And in fact, all these factors we shall take into account while planning our research. Yes. So and also in our report that I mentioned, when we investigate the behavior of the Polish exporters, it was the initial stage. They were quite successful, but of course, because these are non-economic factors which are not predictable, so it's quite difficult to evaluate at that time what would happen in the future. So I do think so that the results of our research, it was about a year ago, are not valid during the current situation. Yes. And so, okay, are there any questions from the audience? Okay, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a comment. I would like to add another maybe impact of the research on the society, which is based on the cooperation between entrepreneurs and the researchers from the European Union or the European perspective. Now we are pushing using European Union funds to conduct research and development projects. So we need to find the researchers on the one side as startups, let's say, and the startups are also looking for people who are experienced in some field of innovations, let's say. And they need to cooperate at the first stage when they are just thinking about the project, because they need each other in order to propose something what would be successful. And on the other side, they, after this cooperation, when they receive the funds, they just started to realize the product, to introduce that to the market. So now we can find a lot of projects started with the startups, which are combining our cooperation. So this is also the impact from the micro level, and I feel that it is something specific, let's say, for us, for Poland, maybe, but it is really efficient when we are looking for new ways or thinking about sustainability and the needs connected with energy efficient, things like that. We need innovation, but startups are more responsible just to think in a risky way about that and find the funds which are mostly connected with European Union funds. Thank you.
Would you like to make some comments, professors?
I don't have a lot of comments, just to share with you, again, the experience sharing North American perspective. On our campus, we have one such example of collaboration between researchers and entrepreneurs. There is one company, I think private equity company called Blackboard. Hubert, is that called Blackboard, the launchpad? Blackstone, sorry. Blackstone is this private equity company, so it is national and global. So it sets up this on-campus physical presence called Launchpad, like an incubator in different universities. But there are so many universities, so we are one of the lucky ones because we've done a lot of work with our own Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, IIE. So we are one of the chosen universities. Incubator is a big deal. Incubator is to provide physical space for tiny, small startup companies to, to get going, right? So most of these people are still students or part-time employees elsewhere. So how can they have a physical office space? Well, with COVID, it's less important, but that whole idea of Blackstone Launchpad was planted, I know, on our campus maybe 5 or even 8 years ago. So that is one tangible way and an example that I know of. But in terms of truly publishing papers, with you, if you were an entrepreneur, and with me as a scholar, why are you spending your time with me on my research project? Assuming you're rational, that means the research project has to be valuable to you as well, right, as an entrepreneur. So that has been a challenge. I know we are promoting such research, but I have not seen a lot of examples. That's all I can share. So.
Just building on that, as far as examples are concerned, the incubators I'm aware of, at least for instance in Cornell, there is it's called the Cornell Lab, but it's more for for startup, but technical. It's not really for economists, And I would say it's the same in many European countries, like in Switzerland. You have, but faculty of engineering, then you will have incubators. But that's another issue. As far as economics, much less. However, it's also due to the way the education is conceived and designed. In the United States, you also have grants. You have companies, contributing to budget of university or so on. And for instance, we have the case competition or the pitch competition. We have in the competitions I mentioned a moment ago, we have a case competition, our annual conference. It's for the students who work on a business case and provide the solution. And we have also what is called a pitch competition. So we have young entrepreneurs from all over the world, and they are selected, and you have 5 laureates, and they present in a pitch their project, and they get a small amount of money. And one of the two, I think, is, for instance, financed by Cornell, which is a very big company in the US. It's a practice which is not uncommon in the US, where you have that kind of involvement in the university. To my knowledge, I think it's a less in a European background, because education and university budget and everything, they are not designed the same way.
So thank you. And I'm just wondering, because about the practical aspects of transferring knowledge. Yes, because you mentioned, of course, that it's very important to share the knowledge with our students, outside the research world. So can you give us examples from your American perspective? What are the new ways of teaching, delivering knowledge? I think that you just could share our views, and could share your knowledge with us, because we are at the stage that we must, especially after COVID, that we must introduce some innovative approach to teaching, learning, and the issues like that. I think that I'm very curious about that. What are the innovative ways of teaching, learning, and I think that we can use the American perspective and transfer to the European one, or maybe we can transfer from Europe to America.
Again, let me try. IT team, let me have the slides back. I really cannot speak for the entire North American perspective, but I can speak for my perspective. As you can see, at least I focus more on case teaching. The quiz is a little case, right? This NAFTA deal is another case. Basically, I actually have a case on this. This was developed into a case. Students can discuss and debate, what if we lost NAFTA, what will happen, right? So at least I try in my work, try to be relevant. I think being relevant is very important, being relevant. We cannot always teach from old series. Old series are becoming obsolete. And I don't care about your politics, but I can share with you one thing. I thank President Trump for making a lot of old series, old textbooks obsolete. We have to write new textbooks. Students will have to buy new textbooks and learn from new textbooks, okay? So no, President Trump is transformational as a leader. Whether you like him or truly like him or dislike him, I don't care about your politics, okay? And he is making tremendous contributions to the institution-based view. When I first wrote about the institution-based view, lots of people say, institutions are changing. You want to look at countries like China, Poland, Russia. Their institutions are changing, so institution-based view is a great theory to apply to these countries. But take a look at us. We are developed economies, call us US, UK, Canada, right? Our institutions are stable. Our institutions are pro-market. Our institutions are democratic. So, institution-based view is not that relevant to us. Well, Trump made it very clear. Institution-based view is a global perspective. Institutions can change in every country. Every country becomes a transition economy. It's not a bunch of Central and Eastern European countries that should be called transition economies. Every country is in transition. What you are seeing is transition economies. So allow me to share with you my last few slides. I think that's useful, right? At least my approach. 1992, 30 years ago, The End of History and the Last Man by Fukuyama. You all heard about the book, right? If you have not read the book, don't read it anymore. If you have read it, know how to cite it, right? And now, The Return of History. I'm sorry to announce Poland has been attacked one more time early this morning. A tragic coincidence, have you heard? Okay, true return of history. So, what do we do as scholars? I told you about some of my newest papers. In the new era, I want you to emphasize the new era, right? So, here's my last slide. What we do as scholars and what we teach in our classrooms, what we write in our journal articles, books, so on and so forth. I think we have to, I am learning. All theories carry some imprinting. We are all products of the environment in which we grew up professionally, personally. Therefore, a lot of the research we have done by me and by colleagues in this room and a lot of the textbooks you have studied, such research was done in the last 30 years, end of Cold War era. So we talk about transition economies, emerging economies. That great paper that I wrote, because it's great, it's my most widely cited paper. I still encourage you to cite this paper. Institutional Transitions and Strategic Choices. It essentially talks about when institutions in many different countries are turning to become more market-oriented, how companies respond and react in strategic choices. As a state-owned enterprise, how you react. As a foreign entrant going to a new economy, how do you adapt to these changing rules of the game, right? And I think this paper now needs to be rewritten. Okay, this paper is about how institutions are changing to become less global, to become more uncertain, more unpredictable than you as a company, you as a manager, how you are going to make your strategic choices. You all studied the new term, Black Swan, right? Black Swan appeared in my 5th edition for the first time. So, new scholarship must address new reality. And this new reality is something we're all struggling with. It's something that we don't know much about, that we are all coping with. But then companies cannot wait. Managers cannot wait. Officials cannot wait. Therefore, as scholars, we cannot wait. So I think it's a challenge not only to me, but to all the colleagues here and to more people here. New scholarship is needed, and new scholarship has to be timely and relevant and must address this new reality. So these are my slides. Thank you.
Just to answer to your question on how, the audience and basically the way of teaching and the difference.
Yes.
Basically, I mean, there is a necessity to adapt to the audience. As I said a moment ago, the relationship, at least from my experience, and I do not generalize, but from my experience, there is a close relationship with the students, and there is a lot of openness. There are very direct questions. You engage them. You have an example with Mike, which asks questions, who goes. So that's something which is very much developed in the US audience. Perhaps because it corresponds to the American young population. I do not know whether in a European context that would work. Most likely, but I do not have the direct answer. But definitely, we do ask a question, we engage, we even can be very direct. That's the first thing. So the adaptation to the audience and to stimulate reaction and the close relationship. Also, in the courses, bring, even if the issues are a little bit theoretical, we try to encourage them to what the students know, to bring them in a relationship with the reality, so that it's not something which is in the air, very obscure or very theoretical, but can be translated. Sometimes it's a challenge. It's not always possible, but that's an effort that my colleague and myself, we are doing. And the third element is that, again, it's very practical, is we involve the students in, as I said, in the research. But another example, I mentioned this annual conference. I mean, we have many students who help them in organizing the conference. Some of them we deal with the social media, so they will, because they are very good also, and they will help us. Others will deal with the speakers. Others will also, we will consult them about an issue, what's an interesting issue. So they are really part of the organization of an event from a content point of view, as well as an organizational point of view. And I think it also helps expanding their skills, and it's something which is also to be taken care of.
about you. I know that you have a great experience and rich experience in delivering lectures in a new way, maybe.
Well, I wanted to contribute with two examples, but with the American perspective as well, because I was a visiting professor at the University of Lethbridge in Canada, and the approach of students is completely different than in the US. I would say it's more comparable to the European approach, that you need to stimulate students to be involved in the classes. So it was a bit shocking, because we have American students at our university, not that many from Canada. But when I went there for classes, it was just like, okay, I'm coming back to more European standards of dealing with this involvement of people. But of course, then we managed to survive the classes with good discussions, with good projects, and they were very much committed to their works. If I asked students to read the chapters, the handbooks, they were prepared for the classes, which was also another experience, because sometimes you know that not always you are so much involved in your duties at the university. So it is the first experience which comparison between Canada and Europe and Poland as well. And the second experience was with MBA students at IPADE in Mexico again, which is a business school, and it was more like American approach, because it was the teaching way was based on Harvard School. So they were just taught like at Harvard, and they were very much open, very much contributing to the discussion. The classes are based on case studies only, so it was a completely different experience. And one cultural difference, I was asked about giving an advice to Mexican policymakers, economists, and I was aware also of the fact, of course, it's more like a direct and open question, but still you need to take into account that if you are working with Latin American, they are not very much looking in a positive way on European experiences due to the colonization processes. So you need to be very careful. How do you formulate any kind of recommendations or advice? So you have to be sensitive in that sense. And it was striking to me, and I explained it to them, and they said, oh, that's fine with us. We are trained in the US style, so don't worry about this. But still, you need to think on those differences as well. And for the European, I think that we are trying just to involve students each day more. Thank you.
So thank you. So just to involve our students in this, putting some questions. Are there any questions from students? Do you have any questions just to be involved? I think that you think about questions in the future, so unfortunately the time is over. And so I have another question for our dear speakers and our prominent guests concerning because today we discussed very broadly about the topic, about the current topics of the research, about the innovation in your research, also from using the perspective, the American perspective, the European one. And I am just wondering what are the future direction of research, but I think that we'll put the question to our PhD students in another session. Unfortunately, we must close the session close the session right now. So thank you very much for joining us today again. The students, guests, speakers. We are very proud to host so prominent guests and also so prominent academics during today's session, during today's debates. I think I appreciate very much your input in our discussion. Of course, some answers may be valuable for academics, for our students as well, and we receive a big portion of knowledge from our guests, and will distribute for sure among our students. Yes. So thank you very much for your attention, and once again thank you for joining the first and the second session during this American Day. I mean, during the first day of the project concerning North America. So thank you very much for your attention and for once again for attending this sessions. Thank you very much.